All right, why don't we get rolling? So I am thrilled today to be having a book talk with Tobias Rose Stockwell. He is the author of The Outrage Machine: How Tech Amplifies Discontent, Disrupts Democracy, and What We Can Do About it. It's a great book. You guys can see that I've have turned down a bunch of pages on it. It's a lively read. It's an insightful read. It's an insider's perspective on the tech industry of someone who really deeply understands it from having lived it and having a lot of friends in it. So I highly recommend that you buy the book, and I think it tells you a lot about the age that we're living in and the tenor of the age that we're living in. So welcome, Tobias. Just one quick housekeeping note: there is a Q&A function that you all can see, and we will definitely have a robust Q&A at the end of this. So Tobias, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work inside of the tech industry. I know that you were once basically a technologist, actually writing code, but then you kind of moved to be more of like a tech analyst, tech observer. So tell us about where you started and kind of what you do now.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really impressed by your group and everything you've been working on. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. It's a great forum and a great group of people. So thank you. Yeah, so my story begins in this particular context around 2009 when I moved back to Silicon Valley. I was a designer in the early days of the social web. I worked on a bunch of different products and companies that were involved in and taking advantage of the kind of newly viral world of social media. Had a lot of friends that were very early at both Facebook and Twitter, some of the first designers and engineers there, and was just very conscious of many of the ways that a lot of these features were rolled out that began to deeply influence how we see each other online, that have come to dominate the world. So I was aware of some of the decision-making processes that went into how these things were deployed, how haphazard they were at the time, and also this kind of abiding sense of optimism and elation at the prospect of really empowering people and giving people an opportunity to make things that change the world, so to speak. Right? It's become kind of a naive trope at this point in time, but so yeah, I was part of this kind of early cohort of designers and developers that were in Silicon Valley utilizing the newly social web. And in the early days, was really focused on using social tools to help improve the world, right? Like, and what I mean by that is really objectively trying to help raise awareness for different humanitarian causes, for different social causes and social groups, and mostly in developing countries. So I had some early experience and success raising a huge amount of viral awareness for a group of villagers in rural Cambodia in the earliest days of the social web, and was just very enamored by the power of social media to help raise awareness for kind of emotional needs and emotional causes, and for people that had been kind of forgotten or unseen by the rest of the world. So yeah, I was very, very much aware of how these tools could be used for good. Was part of that early wave of kind of optimism that you may all remember. And this is an early kind of adage that was a common refrain around the Valley at that point in time, was that, we just can't believe how good for democracy that Facebook is. Like, Facebook is such an amazing tool for democracy. We can't it's incredible. It's toppling dictators in the Middle East. It's it's making us aware of all these really important causes. It's such just like a net benefit for society. And then conversely, I was also very early to see some of the negative effects, and began writing about what I saw as some of the real detrimental effects of this as early as 2014, 2015, and started publishing what I saw, which were basically the issues related to misinformation, disinformation, and how these tools, this kind of same machinery that can be used to amplify emotional content, also amplifies emotional misinformation and outrage, and how these tools can be used and were used in the early days to really start to distort our political environment and make us more angry and more polarized, more fearful than we really should be, than is really based in reality. So that's a very brief a statement of my last 20 years of working on this stuff. But
from idealism to cynicism, I Googled the other day the Facebook's founding mission statement in 2009. It said, quote, "To give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected." And yet the first sentence of your book is, "This book is about a machine designed to make you angry." So how did we go from giving people the power to share and make the world more open and connected to creating a machine designed to make people angry? Like what happened? And it happened quickly, by the way. We're talking about, a decade, which is really a blip of time. So give us kind of like what you think the main couple drivers are or design changes are that made that happen.
Yeah, so it comes down to I've isolated this specific block of time, which is the years 2009 to 2012, when 3 features were launched quietly at social media companies across the board, and each on their own. Each one of these features, it was actually a very beneficial and immediately useful feature that I think users liked, developers liked. It seemed like a win-win for everyone. But each taking together and amplified across the entirety of the internet have fundamentally changed the type of information that we see and are exposed to and are bathed in on a regular basis. So the first feature is the one-click share, so otherwise known as the retweet, which was a feature that was kind of haphazardly deployed at Twitter. It was initially just something that users were doing on their own before it was an actual feature set. There's the ability to basically press a single button and share information with your entire audience. So that's passing on a funny meme, it's passing on a useful news article, or it's passing on something that you are actually very, very angry about. And the ability to instantly pass on that information turns out that's directly correlated with the spread of both highly emotional information and also highly misinformed content. So a lot of the time, rumors, gossip, hearsay, they actually are dramatically amplified by those tools. The second feature is the social metrics. So it's the numerical invisible number that's attached to your posts. That's likes, number of comments, number of shares, the follower count. All of these things became visible around that time for us as well. And that feature essentially addicted us to the process of seeking social validation online. It goes back to B.F. Skinner, behavioral psychologist in the 1930s, who basically figured out that you can give people give mammals intermittent variable rewards, and it caused them to become addicted to stimulus. So stimulus response, but if there's randomness involved, then people get obsessed, that animals get obsessed with trying to press a button and get a food pellet. And that's basically what social media has done with social metrics. And then
even if it hurts them, right? I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
There are rats that'll keep pressing an electrocuted bar because it hurts, but they still know that they're going to get the reward anyway, right? Which is kind of where we are today with social media, where people, we know it's hurting us, it's not good, but the reward is still there for
definitely. Yeah, and what's interesting about it is it's not necessarily a guarantee of the reward, but it's our brains trying to find a pattern. It's our brains trying to figure out what will get the reward. So if you have consistent rewards, then our brains actually get bored and we move on. We get sated and we stop pressing the button. But if there's randomness involved and there's a pattern involved, then video games have exploited this, slot machines have exploited this, then we will keep pressing. It just hacks this very particular reward center of our brain, which goes back to some kind of foundations in our evolutionary psychology for like searching for food, getting berries from bushes and stuff. You never know what you're going to get, but trying to find the pattern is very much part of our brains. And then the third feature, just to close it out, is the algorithmic feed, which is how content is rank ordered in a feed for engagement and not in a chronological way. So, and that algorithm has fundamentally changed how we consume news and information. So taken together, these three features have addicted us and embedded us in this media ecosystem in a way that that previously we were just observers, and the media ecosystem now is a part of us. We are all participants in this kind of grand spectacle of engagement, of content creation, and of rating each other in this way, and that's really changed how we see each other as a species, I think, in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and at this point, it seems, when we're reading articles about the choices that are being made inside of the platforms, and sometimes it takes people leaking stuff like Frances Haugen for us to get an image of what this is. Sometimes it's whistleblowers, sometimes it's people like you who know people in the industry. It just has become more and more clear in the last couple of years that every time the management, including the executive management at these massive corporations, come to a crossroad, and if you take the one path, you might reduce time on screen, reduce audience optimization a little bit, but it would be better for the community. And on the other path, it's, keep going for optimization of time on screen, and they always choose time on screen, right? I mean, they are engineering for addiction at this point, aren't they?
I think so, and that comes down to some of the basic business models involved, which I think are important to reference and talk about. I don't think the business model is necessarily new, and I don't think this dynamic is necessarily new. A big portion of my research has been going into the history of media companies and the history of kind of news production as a system. News organizations also have the same incentive structure in many ways. They just are worse at it from an efficiency standpoint, right? They want to keep you reading, they want to keep you buying, they want to keep you clicking, and in some ways clicking or purchasing or consuming their content. It's just that social media companies have involved us in that process in a much more intimate way than traditional news organizations could. We're also, in that process of being involved, we're not aware of kind of the journalistic ethics, the norms, the processes of fact-checking, of corroboration, of verification, all the stuff that goes into sourcing good information for us as the public, right? That's not something that we've ever been taught as participants. Like, we're all essentially journalists now. We're all, editors of our own personal newspapers, but we're unaware of the many, the nearly century-long process of professionalization, of ethics, of journalistic codes that went into creating the enterprise of journalism in general. So I want to caveat that yes, you're right. Like, there's absolutely this incentive structure for exploiting our attention for profit. I do want to note that that's also, in many ways, the New York Times basic business model too, in a spicy take there. But social media companies have done so in a way that is certainly more harmful in the short term to society than traditional news has been. And I think that we're in the process of figuring it out, fortunately. But the damage to society could still be great enough to really break the whole system.
Yeah, and the difference too is that if someone spends 4 hours a day reading the New York Times, you're just going to end up with a better informed citizen. If someone spends 4 hours a day on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you're going to end up with someone who's more angry, who has greater ADHD and kind of scatterbrain, who with kids, of course, who have eating disorders, who are getting sucked into all kinds of strange groups, right? Like, so unfortunately, it's, yes, media companies, and I'm a former media person, they want you to keep reading their product and buying their product. But the net effect of consumption of that product is normally a lot better than what we see with social media. I want to go into the effects, and from, as we're a democracy group, right? So there are lots of effects of social media consumption. But for us, we're very focused on polarization and the ability for a country to either come together and govern itself or to continue to fall apart. Disinformation, whether or not we can operate with a common set of facts and some common narratives about who we are. And radicalization, which I think is, something that we've seen a lot of in recent years. Are people willing to engage in political violence? And I think that the interest in the willingness to engage in political violence has gone up. So let's start with polarization. I'm going to quote you from your book on page 80. You say, because of social media, the window of discourse in this country, I suppose around the world, has been shattered into thousands of extreme talking points. Many fringe political perspectives have now been given outsized visibility, and activists on all sides of the ideological spectrum have learned how to get radical concepts into the mainstream. They've all worked out how to take advantage of the fractured window, leaving most people confused as to what a sensible policy might actually be. So tell us more about, not just how you see that happening here, but also abroad. I think you've just gotten back from travels to Indonesia and Japan and elsewhere. This is obviously not just an American phenomenon, but give us your sense of how these technologies exacerbate polarization.
Right. So this was written about and like publicly spoken about at Facebook in 2018 by Zuckerberg. He wrote this post about what they call internally borderline engagement phenomenon, which is if you have extreme content on social media platforms, right? There's this kind of arbitrary line. It's like semi-arbitrary line that's drawn by these companies into what is acceptable and unacceptable content, right? So unacceptable content you put in this one kind of category on one side, which is stuff like hate speech or child sexual abuse material. Oh my gosh, wow! That's a thumbs down for that. I don't know. That's a Apple feature that I disagree with in general. You have these terrible features that are terrible content categories that are generally considered negative. Hate speech, child sexual abuse material, that kind of thing. And if you post anything in that category, it will be banned and your traffic will go to zero. But if you post things that are not crossing that line, but are approaching that line, so everything, not exactly hate speech, but everything but hate speech, not exactly incitements to violence, but everything but incitements to violence, there's a strange phenomenon in which you will get outsized, dramatic increases in engagement the closer you are to that content, right? That content line. So the more borderline the things are that you say, the more likely it is to get a high level of engagement on the platform. And this is for a couple of reasons. It's important to speak about those reasons. One of those reasons is controversy and controversial ideas are inherent attractors of our attention, right? So if someone posts something online, a category, they have a different body of things they're posting, the baby pictures, their new job post, the restaurant they just ate at, and then this odious political view, right? The thing of those four things, right? The thing that you're going to pay the most attention to is the odious political view, and you're going to feel called to respond to that and comment on that. Now, any basic ranking algorithm, seeing that you are commenting and engaging with this, and other people are seeing this as a important topic to engage with, will actually put that at the top of your feed, right? They'll put that piece of content at the top of your feed. It's controversial, and therefore, what of this category of meaningful social interactions, which is what the original engagement algorithm was optimized for, meaningful social interactions. So controversy is, amongst friends, amongst strangers, amongst whoever, is a meaningful social interaction, right? By their initial, standards in the algorithm, in the way the algorithm was built and designed. So, but that's not the whole story. So having these controversies of us kind of, banging our heads against each other and, discussing or hashing something out in a whether it's a toxic way or a more odious way, that is enough for the engagement algorithm to give it some boost. But then if that's observed by a news organization, a web magazine, some enterprising web journalist, they can then take that content, that engagement, that controversy, and amplify it and say, write a whole story on it, saying people are angry about X, right? Or people are disgusted by X online. People, I say X as in like that topic, not the social media
Right.
company. Um, people are upset about this particular tiny controversy, which historically was this tiny fringe piece of of discourse amongst a small group of people, is now amplified both by the algorithm and then by this machine, this kind of media machine of of web journalism trying to capture our attention at scale. And so between those things, there's this dramatic increase in focus on what were historically very minor issues, very, very minor issues. And that has allowed for many savvy political operatives, activists and people that have causes or things they're trying to advance, to really push fringe issues into the mainstream in a way that is disproportionate to their interest and their importance to society at large. And I say this as someone who, again, used to work on a lot of these social campaigns, trying to get inordinate quantities of interest in fringe causes that I thought were very important. And that's part of the game and part of the problem now, is that we have a disproportionate representation of fringe issues that are now part of mainstream political debate in a way that is very confusing for average information consumers, average media consumers.
Yeah,
So
and part of what worries me about this is that it's not just changing our online behavior as citizens or human beings, it's also changing our offline behavior, right? Because going back to Skinner, it's training people to go up to find that moment, to find that that toxic moment, to find
the
that
edge. Yeah, find the edge.
Find the edge, and then stay on the edge.
Right.
And once you're there, inevitably that's also gonna affect the rest of your life too, right? It's not as if you can go and do this and then say, oh, well, that's a former, that's a me that I put in a little box when I all of a sudden put my phone down. I think it affects us too, which is why, we talk to current members of Congress. They talk about how unruly their town halls have gotten in the last, 5-6 years, to the point where many of them just don't even want to do it anymore. It's not worth it anymore because they devolve into chaos. So, so tell a little bit more about that, because that gets to the radicalization point that we're worried about how this is kind of like almost teaching people to be radicals, rewarding their radical behavior, because all of a sudden they're getting likes for it and they're developing community around it. And it normalizes what once was considered to be just completely unacceptable stuff.
Yeah. So the phenomenon of being touched by virality is, I think, something that we haven't experienced before, really. Most of us haven't experienced before the social web came online. And something really strange happens for us, where we're signal processing machines. We are dedicated to trying to find meaning and purpose within our communities, to be we want to be heard, we want to be seen, and we want to be contributing to the cause of our shared goals in our communities, in our societies. That's like a core human impulse. Now something strange happens online when you say you're an average user, again, posting benign content, your baby pictures, your job post, your meal, and then you're angry about something. You see something online, you're angry about it, and then you post an angry kind of point of moral grandstanding about an issue that you think is very, very important, right? It turns out that kind of post, right, that includes moral and emotional language that includes, things that are condemning of others, lie, I'm disgusted by this thing, I hate Republicans, I can't believe Republicans are doing this, I can't believe they're trying to punish women, I can't believe, Democrats are being so unethical and not, protecting the sanctity of our border, and this just disgusts me. That kind of content will get a 17% boost to diffusion and virality per emotional and moral word used. So this is research by Billy Brady, Molly Crockett, J. Van Bavel, NYU, and Yale. And they found that basically, if we use this language, you will get a natural boost to engagement and virality. So, and net diffusion of that content. So if you're posting, you're an average person posting on these platforms on a daily basis, you're getting, 2 likes, 10 likes, 12 likes here and there. And then suddenly, you post this thing that you're angry about and you get 100 likes from this thing, and it goes viral because it's moral and it's emotional. People are paying attention to it. That actually trains us, right? That actually dramatically influences how we see who we are and who we should be, right? Because we are responding to that signal from our audiences. And that signal from our audience is telling us this is important, right? It's important for you to be angry about this particular issue. It's important for you to embody this anger and this condemnation and to lean into that, right? And I think we've all, in some ways, if you've been on social media, you've had an experience like this, particularly in the context of the elections. I think that was a moment where everyone started feeling it in 2016, which was like all of a sudden you felt the need to comment on what felt like the kind of the degradation of the values of our country, or the the issues of the moment, and we felt like we needed to stand up and pick a side on this stuff. And in those moments, we get a huge amount of signal back from our audiences, but that signal actually is telling us to do something. It is telling us to be more outraged and be more angry and be more upset much of the time. There's an interesting anecdote around this, which is if you look at Trump's tweets going back to 2011, in the same particular time period, 2009, 2012, Trump was a very average political or semi-political figure on Twitter. He's like average celebrity. And if you look back at his tweets around that time, he would get an average of maybe 40 or 50 likes or retweets per post. It was like, watch me on The View tomorrow, or check out my new development in Soho. And then there was one day in July of 2011, he was watching Fox News and he was getting angry about something. He posted basically calling Barack Obama a radical in 2011, in July of 2011. And that suddenly went from average of 40, 50 retweets and likes to 2,000 retweets and likes. Right, so it went this huge signal for him as a user, and then just a week later, he posts another piece about Barack Obama selling guns to Mexican drug lords. Again, I apologize for the thumbs up. That's not something that I am doing intentionally. This is like a native Apple thing that is a horrible feature. But in that process, Trump, again, we're all signal processing machines. Trump saw this tremendous influence or this tremendous reaction from his audience and started to change the tenor of his tweets. And I think that's actually the beginning. And Trump's always been a media, he's always been trying to get in front of the media. He's always been trying to be a media personality. And from that point, you can see the beginnings of Trump as the kind of bombastic, outrageous personality that he is today. And, he definitely had elements of that in his personality beforehand, but I think the version of him that we know, that we've seen online, that we've come to know as this very intense, very extreme person, was trained largely by this system also to become the more extreme version of himself. And what I want to note about that is that the people that were retweeting and sharing his content there were not agreeing with him necessarily. That wasn't just an entire audience that was giving him 2,000 thumbs up of approval and likes. There was a lot of people in that audience that actually were just retweeting to disagree with him wholeheartedly, right? To be like, I can't believe this guy is saying this crazy stuff. And that's something the media has done historically, I think fairly poorly, is like amplified the more extreme rhetoric.
Oh yeah, entire stories were written about his tweets.
Right, exactly, and that was a way for him to get attention, regardless of his, and it always has been a way for him to get attention, regardless of the actual quality of the content there. He's just known how to get attention using these same dynamics. So yeah. I think I want to note that Trump is not unique in that regard, in that I think we've all been in some ways touched by these tools and trained to be more extreme versions of ourselves in different contexts.
Yeah, and imagine how weird it would be if 3 billion people, which is I think Facebook's current user base, were going on a weekly basis, and many of them on a daily basis, to outrage camps. Right, like when I was a kid, I had to go take dance lessons. Right, like imagine if we were sending our kids and even on the parents to outrage camps, to figure out how to get up to the line, to figure out how to push the buttons right, to figure out how to say the nasty thing about someone that's going to get attention and then say it again and again and then start fighting with people we've never met before online. Imagine if we were doing that in physical spaces. Obviously, people would think that we had lost our minds, that civilization had lost its minds. But because it's on a phone, and because it's in this almost kind of fictionalized environment where there's a lot of anonymity, we don't think of ourselves that way. We don't understand how much it's actually kind of changing the internal psychological and emotional structures of us as human beings. So I wanted, on the disinformation point, I mean, I think that the striking fact in your book that you pull out, and then we can kind of move on to fixes, because I think fixes are so important right now, is the study that you cited from Deb Roy, the great technologist at MIT, where he did an experiment in the wake of the 2016 election that showed that fake news traveled 6 times as fast on social media as real news did. And that's almost an enough said situation. I mean, it gets to all the stuff that you were talking about the sensationalism, the outrage, the getting up to the line, and then staying there. Fake news obviously does that a heck of a lot better than real news does. So let's switch to fixes, because I think that the people who are watching this, I think that the American public in general, they either completely explicitly get this, they understand that we've reached some kind of a breaking point with social media and these technologies, or they implicitly get it. They just know that something's sick, right? That something's wrong. And they're kind of like a couple categories. The 2 big categories would be regulatory fixes, and then the next one would be design solutions, and then the next one would be, kind of voluntary solutions that we can just do as consumers, like logging off and walking away. Let's start with regulatory. So, we at Issue One right now, along with our Council for Responsible Social Media, we're pushing for the passage of the Kids Online Safety Act. It's a bipartisan bill, thoroughly bipartisan bill. We finally got to 62 senators. I think that we're among less than a dozen bills in the last 10 years outside of must-pass bills like appropriations bills that have gotten that far in the Senate. The Senate Judiciary Committee recently had a hearing, and Lindsey Graham pointed out that every tech reform bill that's come before Senate Judiciary has been voted out of committee unanimously. And as he pointed out, that is not happening in the Senate Judiciary Committee these days. So KOSA is one of these bills that is doing really well. People get it. I assume that when you look at something like a KOSA, which would empower parents, which would make sure that kids aren't getting access to information that they shouldn't be getting access to, and providing greater protections for them, that type of a reform makes total sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I defer to you on the specifics and of that bill, but I'm very impressed by how substantial and kind of coherent the bipartisan support is for some of these different interventions. I think Section 230 reform, as we're talking about, which is the broad immunity that platforms have from any kind of liability associated with their tools, is such a critical piece of the puzzle here, because there's no other kind of industry carve out in history that has allowed for major companies like this to totally skirt liability from the harms associated with these tools. And so I think the childhood harm angle is certainly really important and very helpful in highlighting some of these issues. The issues related to platform transparency, I think, are in some ways even more immediately, I think, I don't know, I'm going to say promising, but I think there's pieces of it that I really, really think are important. Per Frances Haugen's testimony and the documents that she pulled from Facebook, a lot of the harms of these tools are actually visible and known by these various companies. They're not all of them, certainly, but a lot of them are actually understood, right? They've done the research internally. That's they've put teams on some of these harms. That it's actually, some of it's actually known. It's and
they have fixes too. In some cases, don't they actually fix it? That they've chosen not to greenlight. It's the technology exists. All they have to do is push a button, and they're not doing it again because they want to maximize time on screen, including with our children.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I don't think, and I want to like put a little asterisk that I don't think these are necessarily bad people that are making some of these decisions, and I'm not here to defend decisions like that at all. But what I will say is that these companies are actually, we tend to think of them as monolithic and entirely impervious to both competition and any kind of regulatory reform. But these companies are in a highly competitive race for users' attention. I mean, we've seen how quickly TikTok has overtaken Instagram and Facebook as the primary social media platform, for one of the most important demographics, which is kids, right? In just a few years. So there is a highly competitive environment. And so in some ways, this I think is an important kind of prisoner's dilemma to note that if a company does implement, if it treads too carefully when it comes to, and again, I'm not being an apologist in any way for these decisions, but if they do actually fix these things in a way that dramatically decreases screen time, then another company is liable to come in and scoop up those chunks of traffic that they're leaving behind.
Right, but by the same respect to bias, like if you think about this article that came out in the Wall Street Journal recently about this, these groups that have been set up where parents are posting pictures of their kids, and it's like a child modeling group.
Yeah.
That's
Gosh, yeah.
group. Mm-hmm. And it got infiltrated rather quickly, or attracted rather quickly, pedophiles. But they also had a tipping mechanism as part of this, so that parents could like get tips after they post pictures of their kids. And
I mean, that's horrible. Yeah,
so
no,
got led to the Wall Street Journal. Did you read the story, right? And,
no, yeah, I mean, that's horrible.
Parents know what they're doing. They know that they are, in a way, interacting with pedophiles. They're making more money off it. They're even having their kids start to chat with the pedophiles online. They knew it was happening, and they chose not to clamp down on it.
Yeah,
and
no, that's horrific.
They're monetizing the behavior. They're monetizing the behavior.
Yeah, like, horrific and totally wrong. Absolutely.
Everyone who works inside these corporations are bad people, but my God, they make a lot of bad decisions. So
I agree. Let me, if I may, the point that I was trying to make there about transparency overall is that the knowledge of these issues and the pressures for profits are very real, and the knowledge about these issues are also real. Transparency legislation that basically gives access to the raw feed of what is happening inside these companies would, I think, actually very quickly cause them to force off a lot of the terrible content and turn on a lot of these safety measures that you're talking about. Because if they're hidden from view, and if they're obfuscated from view, then they don't feel the same level of pressure to actually fix a lot of these issues. So I think that transparency, specifically the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, which I know is working its way as well through Congress right now, I think that's a huge, potentially a huge win, because having just in recent years, since Elon took over Twitter and then turned it into X, he's turned off the access for large numbers of civil society, academia, and journalists and people that would normally be studying this stuff. So having legislation that forces access for civil society, academia, et cetera, could, I think, it would instantly cause them to turn off a lot of the
or clean up parts of their
things that are done. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now we're working with Frances Haugen. She's a member of our Council for Responsible Social Media on that bill, and that also has strong bipartisan support. The metaphor that we often use, or the analogy that we often use, is the FDA. If the FDA wants to get inside a meatpacking facility to make sure that they're doing the right thing, then they can. And the fact that we have no access, or the government has no access, the public has no real access into what's going on.
Huge problem. Yeah, it's a huge issue. Yeah.
Okay, so transparency, the kids' online safety we've talked about. What about reducing anonymity? This is something you mentioned in your book. There are free speech advocates who will say, no, anonymity is an essential part of free speech. That, if you look at the early pamphleteers, for instance, during the American Revolution, many of them were publishing those anonymously. So you you still need some ability to speak anonymously. But there it seems like there's a spectrum of anonymity. One spectrum is anyone who goes and creates a Gmail address can sign up on Twitter or Facebook and create an utterly fake account with a fake name and just go at people, which is a lot of what we're seeing today. The next level would be, which is basically no transparency or no verification, user verification. The next level would be that when you set up an account, that you've got to submit, a credit card, a legitimate phone number, maybe an address or something else. The kind of stuff that you have to submit when you order a shirt online, right? And then the highest level, of course, would be, and then with that, you could set up whatever kind of username you want. Crazy dad 123.
Right.
The next level would be that you are who you are when you're online, that I'm actually Nick Penniman online, you're Tobias Rose Stockwell when you're online, and there's just no way to hide that with any kind of a handle or username. I mean, where do you fall on that spectrum of reducing anonymity?
Yeah, so I fall on a slightly different spectrum, and I actually really do. I respect and kind of acknowledge the foundations of where people are coming from in terms of the free speech arguments. The history of the United States is very much based on, like you said, pamphleteers and people, from Hamilton onwards, trying to speak their minds and increasing the body of available speech by using pseudonymity. But it wasn't a question that those were real humans actually writing those things, right? And I think that's the most important thing, is to ensure that these are actual humans with persistent identities, and not bots, and not LLMs masquerading as humans. And I think this issue is going to become extremely important. It's very important today, but I think certainly during the election, if a single person can pretend to be thousands of other people online, right? I think this goes to the free speech argument. That dilutes the free speech of many, many other people by over indexing and over allowing the speech of one person to pretend to be the speech of many other people with particular agendas. So I think human verification is one of the most important pieces of this puzzle moving forward, because it will break free speech in this country if we don't fix that. And so I want to focus on that, because there's ways to do that both involve real human verification, and I think real human verification should be done both legibly for the public and also internally. And there's a whole bunch of things that can be done at social media companies to essentially capture and make sure that content is coming from a real human versus coming from a large language model or coming from a bot network, that kind of thing. Yeah. So there's a lot you can actually do internally to make sure that happens. I think that phone number verification is a great first step. I think that pseudonymity is very important. I think it's important for people to have the ability to pretend to be to actually not put their public name on on content that they're sharing online necessarily, but making sure that they're real humans, I think, is absolutely essential and would dramatically improve the kind of spectrum of available quality information that we see. I would actually go one step further than that, and speak this in a way that I think is important, which is, the reason why we have what we had blue checks in the first place was to give trust to a network that was historically low trust, right? So Twitter was a totally open, random place where anyone could be anyone, pretend to be anyone, and there was huge numbers of impersonators, and people went on to try, pretending to be Kanye West, and a whole bunch of people. It's the reason that Donald Trump's Twitter handle is real Donald Trump is because there was 50 other impersonators pretending to be him on the platform initially. So, in a low trust network like that, there's a lot of harm that can come to people's collective perception about what's going on. So different ways of increasing the level of trust through verification, and not through just paid verification. I think that helps a little bit, but I think it also that really does. There was a horrible rollout on at X, but it really has diluted the pool of available quality content. But more than that, I think that, you know, the privilege of verification should be given to people that are actually sharing good information. And what I mean by that is information. Like if you are constantly abusing your status as being a verified user by sharing stuff that is knowably false, that is then, you know, verifiably debunked on a regular basis, then I think those privileges should be demoted or you know, not necessarily revoked, but certainly downgraded to some degree in terms of
you
your
certainly would do it if
dissemination.
you were in a town hall, right? And the
Right.
same quack kept standing up in the back of the bleachers, spouting off stuff that, you know, he or she had read in some fringe publication and taking up everyone's time. You'd eventually be like, okay, Fred, it's time for you to sit down, right? I mean, that's what we would do in normal human communities. We would figure out how to marginalize those people and downgrade them in some way.
And I think it's really important.
Online communities, they end up being elevated, right?
Agreed. And I think this, you know, this analogy you're making of physical spaces is a really important one to make, right? You know, our devices, when we hold them in our hands and we interact with them, they are basically, you know, analogous to physical rooms that we're spending time in. And we're not, you know, we're in these rooms constantly. We are spending more time in these rooms than we are in this real world, right? We're actually having conversations in these spaces constantly. And the defaults and designs of those spaces matter dramatically in how information is shared, right? So like the way that WhatsApp is designed, it's basically a room with a maximum of, you know, 250 something people in it that has a microphone in the middle of it that anyone can get up into and just shout into without any kind of moderation. And so I'm actually heartened by some of the different moderation design changes that are available for different platforms. So like Reddit, for instance, allows for each subreddit to be moderated in different ways. So you can start a subreddit and you can implement certain norms of behaviors and rules for people to follow when they're in that space. So it's allowing for people to actually act in various codified ways to maintain a level of stability, make sure things stay on topic and stay on point. And those defaults really do dramatically matter for the norms, the cultural norms of a space and type of information gets shared. And we deduce those norms when we enter into these spaces. So if you think about Twitter, for instance, right? We go on a Twitter and the norms we deduce when we're on Twitter, X, is that, this is a place for sarcastic retorts and dunking on people and being clever and witty and kind of acerbic and just digging on people. And we deduce those norms when we are in that space because they are not set by any kind of cultural priority or set of norms that we knew about when we're walking in. So we just deduce those from the people that we see. Now, LinkedIn, and I want to note this is actually an interesting anecdote from Deb Roy. LinkedIn, it tends to be a very civil place. It's one of the better social media platforms right now, not least because it's a professional place for people, but because very intentionally, when they launched their feed most recently, they broke it and made it read only for a period of time. And so, and they gave access to post to a certain number of influencers and professionals that were basically modeling good behavior in the space, right? This is what kind of plucky self-promotion looks like. This is what good cultural norms look like. This is how you promote yourself. This is how you post on social media on this particular platform. And that seeded the norms of that community and has made it a pretty good place overall. I think it's a fairly healthy social platform because those norms are present. And if you don't set those norms, if you don't allow people to set those norms, if you don't give people the tools to set those norms and create those norms, then the defaults of the emergent culture will dominate. And places like Twitter, places like Facebook, we've seen what happens in those places. They tend to become very toxic and not good for us.
Yeah, let me say that to the audience that definitely start putting your Q&As in. So Tobias, you just talked about some design changes that the platforms can voluntarily make. I do want to hit on Section 230 because you mentioned it earlier. And for those in the audience who don't know, it's the piece of legislation that it's actually language inside of a piece of legislation passed back in the 1990s that give the platforms almost unlimited, lack of liability for the content that's posted on their sites. I mean, I don't know of any other situation in which, when you're designing a media environment for a civilization, especially a pluralistic democracy, where you would grant the largest communication entity within that democracy, kind of the ability to evade the same kind of libel and defamation laws that you use to control all of the other media in that environment, right? So what about a surgical editing of Section 230 that would open up the platforms to greater defamation and libel law, and make them responsible past a certain point for the stuff that's being posted on their sites?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to that. I think that as if I could wave my magic wand and make it happen. I think there's a lot of vested interest and billions of dollars on the line as to how that is actually implemented. One of the more compelling ways of thinking about this that I've heard recently is basically removing Section 230 protections for highly amplified content, and also, in addition to, removing liability protections for LLM generated content, and for AI generated content, which I think that's the elephant in the room. That when we're talking about the issues of social media, we're talking about issues from 8 years ago on social media versus the issues that are coming barreling at us right now as a result of AI. So I think it's really important to note that the way that these tools are going to be deployed in conjunction with large language models and different AI models it's going to be totally different, and it's going to be really, really problematic and hard for us. I think that it's going to force us to really reckon with how we use these tools to discern reality, right? And, just to speak to Sora, which is this tool that was just launched by OpenAI week before last, which allows for you to generate a bespoke video, a highly realistic bespoke video of anything based on a command prompt, right? So that is going to require social media companies to mitigate some of these immediate and impending harms that come from fake content. Like we need to have this yesterday. Right?
I know, and listen. I want to get to some questions from the audience, but we need to realize these are the largest, least regulated corporations in the history of humankind. Facebook's profits last year alone were $100 billion. And so these companies have almost no regulation. They live in a regulation-free environment, and yet they're controlling our minds and our social behaviors, and to some extent, increasingly, our governments and our democracies. So it's time. Regulation is long overdue. Margie asks in the Q&A section, what can the average person do to influence our leaders towards more discussion and more regulation on this issue? Would love to hear quickly, Tobias, what you have to say about that, and then I've got a suggestion also.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your suggestions, but I would say call them and tell them to support PATA, Platform Accountability Transparency Act, and potentially KOSA as well, and really try to encourage your elected representatives to get on this issue, and yeah, get behind it. So.
Yeah, same. I mean, I just think that people need to say that they think this is making us crazy as a society, and something needs to be done about it. And you shouldn't have the companies this size that are this unregulated. Ben pushed back on the notion of anonymity and said, why do you think that retaining anonymity is so important? Just because pseudonyms were used in the early days of the Republic is a very different thing in a different age, without the ability to viralize things in the same way that people can today. And I have to say, I struggle with this too. I mean, you look at my pathetic number of followers on Twitter, and I'm a former journalist and a guy who runs a legitimate nonprofit organization that works with members of Congress trying to get legislation passed, and I have like 1,700 Twitter followers, and yet Cat Turd, right, who's just one of the meanest, nastiest people online, has 2.5 million followers, right? So, which is more than I think probably all but 3 or 4 newspapers in America. Like his reach is greater than almost 3 or 4 newspapers in America, whoever Cat Turd is. So like, why the anonymity? Yeah, what is the why do we need to stand by it, Tobias? Because if you want to put an idea out into the world, you can print it if you want. You can start a web page through WordPress or anything else and put your ideas out there. But when it comes to promoting those ideas and pushing them in some way, maybe when you're on an online platform as part of a community, you actually need to be doing it as yourself, in the same way that 50 years ago, if you wanted to promote an idea, you would actually have to hand a leaflet to someone in public and try to convince them.
Yeah, I think the best argument that I can see for anonymity comes from the developing world, and from the large percentage of the global population now that lives in authoritarian systems, and that there is real physical danger to sharing information that might be considered a threat by the authorities. And Elon and most social media companies have shown willingness to adhere to the local laws of these various places. And so if you are an anonymous person posting online, you're trying to get your ideas out there, hiding your identity is extremely important for trying to avoid repercussions, and the repercussions for your family, and physical safety for your life and the people you love. So I really am very sympathetic to that in the context of other autocracies and authoritarian countries and places that really do struggle with this. So I think that's very important, and I think that's a big piece of this. I don't think that it is a insurmountable problem, particularly if you use a intermediary in a country that maintains some of these values of democratic free speech and norms that could actually keep basically maintain a level of protection for people that are in these various places. I'm sure that body or that agency would become a target, but that is part of the democratic process, and something we've historically done as a country here in the United States has been a bulwark and a kind of defender of democratic ideals and free speech for other people in other countries. So I think that some kind of body or nonprofit or agency that could help maintain both human verification as well as pseudonymity for people could be really, really valuable and really important in defending against these issues without triggering these other issues related to large-scale manipulation that comes from total anonymity and availability of anonymity to everyone. So I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, and I think it's definitely technically solvable and something we can do. But it's not a quick fix, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. All right, and then one of my great board members, Diana Vive, asked what we can learn from European countries in the EU on this front, and the answer is, Diana, that we're running out of time, but the answer is a lot. They are actually ahead of us, as Tobias could tell you, and many of us could tell you, in terms of regulating social media and increasingly regulating artificial intelligence. We are playing catch up here in America. But I do think we're playing catch up. I have to say, folks, just as kind of closing thoughts, that the signals that we're seeing on Capitol Hill around this stuff, and also in some of the state capitals across the country, signals are very strong. They're very bipartisan. People get it. And there's a lot of activity just coming out of the woodwork. I mean, Lindsey Graham and Elizabeth Warren are writing a bill right now to create a tech regulatory agency, an FDA of tech. If that isn't weird in an encouraging way, I don't know what is. So Tobias, thank you so much for all of your insights on this. I'm sure you will be on this beat for the rest of your life. And I look forward to working with you as we all move forward to leaning into solutions to regulate these companies and kind of reduce the the toxic pipeline that is polluting our water supply here. So thank you, Tobias, so much.
Thanks for having me, Nick. This is great.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you later.